Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alexandros Makarigakis. I'm the UNESCO Director and Regional Representative for our office in Eastern Africa, based in Nairobi. And I'm in such a great position to be able to moderate today a great panel on connecting science diplomacy agendas, right, in a fragmented world. We have with us the top science advisors from a number of countries who will take the floor. But in the meantime, allow me to say a few things about the whole international agenda. I'm going to start a little bit with UNESCO, since I am from UNESCO. We are the scientific arm of the United Nations family, and we're responsible for at least supporting member states in areas not only of natural sciences, but also social and human sciences. The past few years, we have managed to put together a couple of recommendations for the member states to follow, starting with that one on science and scientific research, following up on open science, and last but not least, the recommendations on ethics of artificial intelligence. But beyond our STI work, we look at science diplomacy also from a sectoral point of view. I don't know if you were here in the morning where my colleague Roman Murenzi spoke about the shared resources that member states share, right? That despite our political boundaries, they are natural resources that we need to manage together. And I don't know if you are aware also that practically we have around 300 river basins and lakes in the world that are shared, and double that in transboundary aquifers, so groundwater bodies that are shared by 2 or more countries. It's not a funny, I think it's an obvious part that for rivers and lakes, we have thousands of agreements. Right? So there's no need so much for diplomacy there. But for groundwater, because we don't see it, we have maybe 1% of the 600 bodies being covered by agreement. So there is a lot of need for diplomacy there. And the way to go about it is, of course, through science. So we try to help member states, first of all, put together expert teams and understand the resource, and then eventually agree on how to manage it together. But enough about UNESCO. Let's talk a little bit about the overall UN and what member states have agreed to do together. We all are familiar, I hope, with SDGs, and science and technology is prominent, at least on SDG 17, where it gives the means of implementation and revitalization of global partnerships for sustainable development through technology. And the way that member states, countries have agreed to do that is to develop these roadmaps, right? These science, technology, innovation roadmaps, and develop these pathways so that they can see how can they rapidly adopt technological solutions. And actually, next week in New York, you will have the UN Interagency Technical Task Team, the group on science and technology, that they will meet and discuss these roadmaps. And these roadmaps are also being discussed by G20, which has a development working group on the guiding principles for the development of STI roadmaps. But it's not only the SDGs that have captured the need for science, right? Even on the Addis Ababa Action Plan, that looks more at the finance part of things, has requested the development of a technology facilitation mechanism. And we're coming now to this year, 2024, with the Summit of the Future. Again, I don't know if you are familiar, but because we are not doing very well in the implementation of SDGs, countries developed this common agenda report with the idea of better responding to the current and future challenges. And within this Summit of the Future, which is labeled as a once-in-a-generation opportunity to enhance cooperation on critical challenges and addressing gaps, we will have a pact for the future. And of course, STI has at least one article dedicated to it. Last but not least, I'm going to stop boring you with global stuff. I had the opportunity to attend on behalf of my organization the G77 in China meeting that was held in Uganda in January, where basically the member states of G77 repeated their commitment to the statement they made the year before in Havana, in Cuba in 2023, where the political declaration was on current development challenges, the role of science, technology, and innovation. And just to put things into perspective, G77 is 80% of this world, right? The population of the world, 80% of it. So obviously there is a huge demand, right? And that's why we're here today. So before I give the floor, though, to our esteemed panel, I just want to give you another thing. I don't know if you are observing, like I have, in the past 5 years, we are experiencing, of course, the pandemic, multiple and simultaneous conflicts, and climate change, of course, effects, and a lot of cooperation challenges. And this gives us a context which is dominated by less peace, less democracy, but more tech and science. So science is more and more being trusted to provide solutions, and notably through scientific diplomacy. And that's why we're here today, to start this discussion, right, on what can we do, what some of us are doing, and what can we do together. So the objective of the session is to check out on the potential of science diplomacy as a soft power which is not being fully harnessed. And to start the discussion, I'm going to ask Dr. Patricia Gruber, who is the Science and Technology Advisor to U.S. Secretary of State, to start the discussion. Let us know a little bit what they are doing for the time being, and then I will come up with a second question. Patricia.
Thank you, Alexandros. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for the opportunity to share some examples of how the United States cooperates through science diplomacy for the global good. The U.S. is working to deepen, broaden, and align collaboration with our partners. Our interconnectedness is a source of strength in this period of fierce strategic competition and global challenges that pose threats to lives and livelihoods. We're doing this through what Secretary Anthony Blinken calls diplomatic variable geometry. I always have a problem with that word, that phrase. What that means is assembling a group of stakeholders that's the right size and the right shape to address a problem. We're very intentional about determining the combination that's truly fit for purpose. These coalitions don't exist in a vacuum. Creating and strengthening any one group brings capabilities that can be used across America's vast network of partners. And the more coalitions we build, the more we find new synergies among them, and the more successful we'll be. Together, the whole becomes much greater than the sum of the parts. Fellow democracies have always been our primary partners for cooperation, but on certain priorities, big global challenges such as the SDGs, if we go it alone or only with our democratic friends, we will come up short. Many issues demand a broader set of potential partners with the added benefit of building stronger relationships with more countries. This involves more than just partnering with national governments. It also means working with local governments, civil society, the private sector, academia, and citizens. The U.S. State Department engages relevant stakeholders to promote international STI ecosystems through public-private partnerships, educational exchanges, workshops, and multilateral fora, such as the U.S.-EU Trade and Technology Council, the G7, the G20, APEC, OECD, and of course the UN. But multilateral engagement isn't just about dialogue. It's about outcomes that change lives. One example is PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which was launched in 2003 by President George W. Bush. In its 20 years of existence, PEPFAR has partnered with 50 countries and saved more than 25 million lives. A similar example, the Feed the Future initiative, launched in 2013, involved 20 countries to combat global hunger, bolster food security, and has lifted 23.4 million above the poverty line while helping 3.4 million children avoid stunting due to malnutrition. I think it's really important to note that we really also need to worry about fostering bottom-up science diplomacy efforts. And by this, I mean scientific collaboration and people-to-people exchanges. The United States has multiple programs that seek to build capacity and leverage diverse perspectives. These programs also serve to create sustained relationships that foster S&T progress well into the future. A prominent example in the health sector is the Partnerships for Enhanced Engagement in Research program, also known as PEER, which is led by the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. Over 13 years, the PEER program have funded over 400 researchers across 60 countries to strengthen healthcare systems, infrastructure, access, and performance. With respect to people exchanges, one that most people have heard of is the Fulbright Student and Scholar Program. This is one of several U.S. cultural exchange programs and is the hallmark of our work with countries around the world to share knowledge and skills, while the Fulbright Specialist Program pairs U.S. academics and professionals with host institutions abroad to share their experience, strengthen institutional linkages, and build capacity. It's also important to note that industry investment is increasingly being driven, is increasingly driving technology trends, and that's why the United States is also engaging more and more with industry as key stakeholders and partners. The U.S. Department of State runs the Global Innovation Through Science and Technology program, which helps connect tech companies and entrepreneurs around the world, expand investment opportunities, and foster tech innovation. The U.S. also sponsors STEM programs such as Tech Girls, a summer exchange program to empower and support girls aged 15 to 17 to pursue STEM through hands-on training with American technologists from academia and the private sector. In summary, the solutions that we face collectively, such as climate change, food security, clean energy, or pandemic prevention, cannot be achieved by any governments acting alone. Cooperative science diplomacy is essential to leverage S&T transparently, responsibly, and equitably to drive economic prosperity, well-being, and stability. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Patricia. Now we're going to move to India, and we have with us Dr. Chagun Basa, who is the Chief Policy Advisor, and he provides policy support to initiatives of the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India. Chagun, you're up. You have 5 minutes. Hold on 1 second because we cannot hear you. Can you please go ahead?
Yeah.
Okay, we're good. Yes.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. All the colleagues sitting on dais, I'm sorry I'm not able to meet there in person, but thanks for facilitating this arrangement so that we could share some thoughts from our point of view. The point about how India is looking into science diplomacy and its operations through the instrument of science diplomacy is something that has been continuously evolving in the last decade, I would say. And even before, the concept of science diplomacy for India, it's always about bringing out the nature of inclusivity for engagements in its operations. It's not only the priority of foreign policy, it is also the priority of the scientific development and competitiveness. So the notion that science could be seen as a soft power in diplomatic engagements is, in my opinion personally, is more relevant, I would say, because the soft power nature is taken away from the table the moment we get into the competitive nature of technological engagement. So that is something that we would, I guess, discuss more in detail. So the innocent understanding of science diplomacy is value neutral and positive is something that I personally feel we need to question very carefully when we talk about the topic of the panel today. In terms of India's engagement in science diplomacy, I think India particularly looks at science diplomacy as a tool through which a global voice, particularly from the global south, is represented conversations related to technology governance. Because the moment we move from science to technology, the collaborating nature becomes highly competitive and IP-driven and intellectual property being owned by big state and big tech corporates and stuff. So how do we bring in equitability and also inclusiveness in the science diplomacy conversation, something that India conceptually is also very much clear about in making sure science diplomacy serves the purpose equally for everyone across the world. And in terms of institutionalization policies and strategies, I think the governance ecosystem is putting in place a lot of activities in Indian engagement with its partners, and that includes institutional innovations in the form of restructuring some of the existing departments within the Ministry of External Affairs, within the Ministry of Science and Technology, Electronics, and other technological areas. And if you look at all the technological missions that India has gotten into right now, be it for AI, be it for quantum or cyber-physical systems, for deep ocean exploration, any of these technological missions, it comes with a strong component of internationalization, which it shows the commitment towards the science diplomatic activities that the country is pursuing towards its partner countries, and also more importantly, how it benefits addressing these sustainability challenges that we look at collectively as a community. And one of the important instruments that we see is the multilateral fora through which India wants to pursue the science diplomatic agenda. And when we say science diplomatic agenda, I think we all collectively mean science, technology, innovation, invention, all associated activities of doing science, right? And we know the multilateral conversations that when it gets tougher and negotiations becoming a matter of conversations for hours and hours, how do we actually de-alienate the complexities when it really matters for the serving purpose of science to deliver the solutions? That is in the top of the list for Indian priority, at least for multilateral engagements of concern. And India just passed through G20 presidency, and resilient colleagues are holding currently the presidency. And we have seen it during the Indian G20 presidency how much of importance scientific activities and scientific tracks are being given. We had 3 dedicated tracks for science and technology, and that again shows how serious when it comes to multilateral scientific governance and what role India would like to play in terms of its global science diplomacy efforts. And in terms of policies and strategies, I think one of the important instruments that India holds, which probably many of us might not know in this room, is a long-standing capacity building effort that the Ministry of External Affairs from the Indian government side is pursuing, which is called ITEC, Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation countries across the world. Every year, outside on the list of 300 plus courses from short-term 2 weeks, 3 weeks to 3 months, 6 months programs, where participants come and spend the time in Indian scientific institutions, not just only build capacity in cutting-edge scientific and technological areas, but also in deep science areas. And that program has been silently going on for more than 25 years now, and we could see how this has resulted in many of the science diplomatic efforts that currently we would like to take it forward. And finally, in terms of the efforts that the country is pursuing, I see the multilateral efforts when it makes its headway. Parallelly, there are bilateral efforts. I think the colleague from US also talked about how the Technology and Trade Council efforts within bilateral arrangements are moving forward when it comes to technology and trade linkages and how science plays a major role in it. And similarly, India-European TTC, Trade and Technology Council, India-US Critical and Emerging Technologies Initiative, and similar such technology and security and technology and development initiatives with many of the bilateral agreements and partners that we have is also one of the instruments through which India is pursuing its science diplomacy efforts. And finally, as an insight, I would like to also highlight how the minilateral
Thank you very much, Sagune. A round of applause. Thank you. Again, please stick around because you know we have the question session. And then I'm going to move to the person that practically everybody here should know, right? According to the feedback, at least I'm receiving, Dr. Jan Marco Müller, who is the coordinator for science diplomacy and multilateral relations at the European Commission's Directorate General for Research and Innovation. Jan?
Yeah, thank you, Alexandros. Okay? Hopefully, okay. I think we have gone quite a long way since the famous AAAS Royal Society definition of science diplomacy 14 years ago. In Europe, a whole community of science diplomacy scholars and practitioners emerged, and we have funded through the research framework program of the EU some projects in the area of science diplomacy that help to develop methodologies and practices and develop training materials. And this gave birth now to what is called the EU Science Diplomacy Alliance, which is basically a platform that gathers all the people working in this field. In parallel, we have seen interesting developments in that more and more EU member states are developing science diplomacy strategies. And also we see more and more ministries of foreign affairs of member states strengthening their scientific technological capacities, for instance, by appointing science advisors or special envoys for science diplomacy. Also, the Joint Research Center of the European Commission has very much engaged in strengthening science diplomacy, for instance, seconding me as a science advisor into the European External Action Service, which I did for some time. Besides all these developments which we have seen, Europe is now faced with a new geopolitical reality, which has a profound impact on science diplomacy. Of course, we have Russia that is trying to move borders by military force in Europe. We have China, which is increasingly getting stronger. It's a partner, a competitor, but also a rival. But of course, also we have Western partners that are not the way they used to be, and I just say Brexit or Trump as words here. And this all happens in parallel with very disruptive technologies and developments in science and technologies that may kind of shift the balance of power in the world. So in a way, we are seeing now a tech race, which we haven't seen since the 1960s, and actually all of us here on the panel, all our countries in one way or the others are, of course, also competing with each other. Now, what we are trying to do as a response to this, there are a number of issues. One, you may be aware that for the first time, actually, we are associating non-European countries to the research framework program of the EU, Horizon Europe. And we have signed such agreements with New Zealand, with Canada, with the Republic of Korea, and we are also in dialogue with more countries, which is a way of connecting them closer, of course, to the European research system, and also to develop jointly the global research agenda. We are fostering a multilateral dialogue on values and principles, and actually all the countries on these panels are participating in it to foster a common understanding around issues like academic freedom, like diversity and inclusiveness in science, like open science. But moreover, we also, we've started to develop a European framework for science diplomacy. And last year, for the first time, the 27 research ministers of the EU discussed science diplomacy at a political level and tasked us to develop such a framework. And I can tell you, bringing science and diplomacy together in Europe is not an easy task. It starts already with the fact that science and diplomats have a different concept of what Europe is. Because for diplomats, it's the common foreign security policy of the EU27, and for scientists, it's the European research area with everything between Iceland and Israel. When we talk about science diplomacy in Europe, we are not talking about 27 research ministries, but also about 27 foreign ministries. That makes already 54 ministries I need to talk to. And then, of course, also in institutional architecture of the European Union, it's actually not easy, because foreign policy is first and foremost a national sovereign policy, and we have the unanimity principle in foreign policy, whereas research policy is a shared competence, where member states have research programs, where the EU has research programs. So what we have done is we have designed a process which is very informal and bottom-up, where we have established a small steering team with kind of, say, some of the key movers and shakers in the system to advise us on how should it be structured. And we've come up with 4 pillars. One that is, how can we use science diplomacy strategically to tackle the geopolitical challenges? One, second, how can we make diplomacy more effective, more resilient through evidence and foresight? So looking at science advisory ecosystems, for instance. Then how can we strengthen science in delegations and embassies around the world? And how also to engage with those beyond capitals? Think of diaspora scientists, think of alumni, etc. And then, of course, the issue of training capacity building, which is not just an issue of training the scientists and training diplomats, but also to think about the people who work at the interface and who do the translation job. We have established 5 science diplomacy working groups following an open call where we got 600 applications who will work on these issues, including also some cross-cutting issues like the definition, like values and principles, like the issue of multilingualism, for instance. And together, in a bottom-up way, in groups that are roughly 50-50 between scientists and diplomats, but the scientist and the diplomat co-chair to develop together recommendation for such a European framework. And it does not make sense to develop this in isolation in Europe, because all of us here who are sitting in the panels, we're also reflecting about science diplomacy. So we also want to engage with our partners. We've done so with the United States or with Japan. We're also going to do it with other countries. Because I think there's a big opportunity that all of us are working on science diplomacy at the moment, are developing the ideas, given the situation as it is in the world. And what I'm wondering is whether we can actually do science diplomacy by working together on science diplomacy. I think there's a lot of opportunity for this in the current context. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. Now I'm going to go to our next speaker, Mr. Dan Tutua, who since 2014 is the Deputy Director General at the Department of Science and Innovation in South Africa, and he's responsible for the portfolio of international cooperation and resources. Dan?
Thank you very much, Alexandros, for that opportunity to bring an African perspective to this discussion on science diplomacy. And I want to do 3 things in this brief intervention. First of all, just share with you what is South Africa's perspective on science diplomacy, then look at what are our priorities for science diplomacy, and then lastly, share information on what is our flagship science diplomacy platform, the Science Diplomacy Capital for Africa initiative. Now, one of my criticisms against science diplomacy is that it's become one of those buzzwords in science policy circle where a lot of people talk about. It means different things to different people, and there's often a lot of talk and not necessarily concrete actions. I think it's always very useful that we narrow down and focus on what are the issues to be discussed. But that said, for South Africa, when we say science diplomacy as a national priority, it's not empty policy jargon. It speaks to the DNA of who we are as a nation. Now, as a country, of course, we had to resort to negotiation, engagement, compromise in order for us to be the South Africa we are today, which could celebrate 50 years of freedom and democracy. And that's part of who we are. But it's not only about negotiation and diplomacy, it's also ensuring that those engagements are evidence-based. Because science doesn't tolerate prejudice, science doesn't tolerate falseness, and it's the rigor of the scientific enterprise which provides evidence to inform policy and decision-making, which we held dearly. And those values permeate throughout our foreign policy and throughout our national science policy. So if we then say science diplomacy is a priority for South Africa, how do we organize that? How do we conduct that? Now, as is the case with science, one of the most worrying thing for me as a science policymaker in South Africa is if science is seen as our thing, the thing which belongs to the people in the science ministry, because then nothing will be achieved. Because it should be an all-of-government and an all-of-society approach. And that also applies to science diplomacy. So my ministry, the Ministry of Science and Innovation, is in the lead, but we have a network of working with all other ministries with an interest in this area, the obvious ones: energy, health, agriculture, and very critically, also a role for our Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And then, but just to provide some evidence, and not to be arrogant, not to be boastful. As a core team within our ministry, we have 50-odd people whose full-time job is science diplomacy. That's what I do. Other countries do this perhaps in the foreign ministry. We've made a choice to do that inside the science and innovation ministry. And then why do we need to do that? And what are the priorities? Well, first of all, for African science to grow, we need to be globally connected. We need to be part of networks. We need to be sharing experience. We need to share expertise. We need to have people to be at events like this to ensure an African input. So making sure we are connected to that global knowledge and global scientific enterprise is the first priority. But then secondly, all these challenges, and yes, we celebrate 50 years of democracy, but the key societal challenges of poverty, of inequality and unemployment, which from South Africa are shared global challenges. And we all know the obvious ones: pandemic, disease, food security, climate change. So we're not going to respond to these issues. We're not going to make a difference in improving the quality of living of our citizens, of those in our region and our continent, if it's not part of a global effort. So my former minister, and that's just, many of you will know her, excellent science diplomat, Minister Naledi Pandor. She used to be the science minister, now the foreign affairs minister, which again says something to you of how seriously we take science diplomacy. She would say science per definition, science intrinsically is international. But there's also a third element, and I'm very glad my colleague from India spoke about it, because I think sometimes in science diplomacy circles we shy away from this. I mean, it's not that we all love each other all the time. There are very much interests of national strategic interests at heart, and that's also part of my job. How do we use science diplomacy to advance South Africa's strategic national interests? How do we use science diplomacy to open up new markets, make our products more competitive? And we should have more honest and frank discussions about that. And then, of course, how do we use this, lastly, science diplomacy as a tool? The core principles of South Africa's foreign policy is one of an unequivocal commitment to global solidarity, to multilateralism. We are hugely concerned of the decrease and a lack of commitment to that solidarity we saw across the world. We're one of those nations who are equally at home in the G20. We can be at an OECD meeting. We're very proud of our BRICS partnership, our strategic partnership with the EU, with China, because we truly believe this world is better and stronger if we are together. And our government's objective is also to use science diplomacy to reinforce that global solidarity. So then just to conclude, we have a platform, and you will see the logo here, because we're very proud to be associated and support INGSA. It's called the Science Diplomacy Capital for Africa. It's based on the premise that Pretoria is one of the largest diplomatic capitals in the world. It's by far the biggest diplomatic capital in Africa. Most countries have diplomatic missions there, UN agencies, Pan-African agencies, but it's also the heartbeat of the South African science system. The National Research Foundation, Africa's largest public funder of science, the CSIR, the largest applied research organization in Africa, they're all there. So what we want to do is bring these diplomats and these scientists together. And that's just the first objective. Connect them through regular events, information sharing, and then in the true spirit of discovery science, sees what happened. And we're seeing some exciting stuff happen. But it's also then to use that with very deliberate initiatives. We've partnered with SciComm, with the World Federation of Science Journalists, again, partners here, to, for example, develop a program to advance science journalism in Africa. And because of that, next year, the World Conference on Science Journalism will be the first time hosted in Africa. But in the last point, and this is where I'm gonna join where Jan Marco ended, as always, perhaps a bit provocatively, we were also a little bit concerned that the science diplomacy narrative was one which, always grateful to AAAS, always grateful to Royal Society, that's where it all started. But it was, I hate the terminology global north, because we must also define what it means. But yeah, it was one which was being dominated and defined elsewhere, not in an inclusive way. So we said, yep, we admire, I see Marga in the room, we admire Jesta, we admire the work AAAS and others are doing, but Africa needs to have a seat at the table. And we needed to create a platform to do that so that Africa contributes to shape and design the global science diplomacy framework, and that we're not only a target of capacity building programs, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dan. And now I'm moving on to our next speaker, Professor Motoko Kotani, who is the Executive Vice President for Research at Tohoku University in Japan, and she serves as a Science and Technology Co-Advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Japan. Motoko? Motoko has some slides. Can we have the slides on the screen? Or if you won't, come here, please.
No, it's okay. I can see it. So next page, please. So thank you very much for your kind introduction. I'm Motoko Tani, Science and Technological Advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Next page, please.
They're trying to change it, but...
Very much. Now it works. So as we navigate an increasing complex geopolitical landscape, it is essential to recognize the role of science. A world where science is intertwining in national interests, such as economy, trade, security, and global contribution. Open and secure research and development ecosystem need to be built in international order. This is how science diplomacy comes in. I would like to put emphasis that scientific contribution to a better world can achieve through trust among people involved in human network. Next page, please. So let me share with you the Japanese initiative and contribution to build a network and the network of network. So Japan currently has 32 bilateral science and technology cooperation agreements with a total of 47 countries and organizations, based on which Japan has promoted a research cooperation and human exchange in science and technology domain. So many of you in the audience should know the STS Forum held in Kyoto annually. It actually celebrated 20th anniversary in 2023, and I like the name of STS because ST is science and technology, but the last S is society. So even 20 years ago, we pay attention that the how science and technology is related with society. So recently, Japanese government is very keen to have a broad reform for internationalization of the country by accelerating global talent mobility with the SICOP and Aspire, the establishment of ASEAN Fund, and designated University of International Research Excellence. You would wonder, Japan is has been playing a role in international scene, and why we said that internationalization is important at this moment. But to be honest, Japanese country, Japan is really behind and falling apart from the center of internationalization, and the challenge is university. Even the research-intensive university is not international at all. So we really have to change that. Next page, please. So growing importance of the role of science advice to those who make decisions is no doubt. The long pandemic has undoubtedly reshaped our world in profound way, reminding us the importance of global cooperation and solidarity. The revisit of the ambitious Sustainable Development Goals set forth by United Nations requires not only the dedication of scientists, but also the collaboration of stakeholders from all sectors of society. We must become more active in identifying missions where science and technology can contribute effectively and where major breakthrough can be expected. In my role, I'm the PD, program director of a program called SATRES, Science Technology Research Partnership for Sustainable Development. It is a unique ODA program based on science and technology, organized by JST, collaborating with JICA. So here, at the both Farmerston meeting and INGSA meeting, we often hear the gap between the potential in Africa or potential in Global South with the reality. How we feel the gap? It's essential. And I don't know the solution, but the ODA is one of the way. So Japan completely changed the concept of ODA. Before it's technological transfer, but now it's a co-creation value and the human capacity building. And so through the project, we foster the young generation on science and technology, really make a value for society. And so this SATREPS has now a total of 183 joint research projects in 57 countries since 2008. One half is from West Asian country, it's obvious choice, but 1/4 with African country, and 1/4 is different other area, including Latin American, Caribbean. And I also serve for the UN 10-member group on SDI for SDGs. SDI forum is mentioned, and I'm going to attend this forum next week in New York. And also I'm a vice president for Science and Technology, Science, the Society of ISC, International Science Council. Fora such as INGSA and Farmerston provide important opportunity for science in a position to provide science advice to meet, exchange view, and learn from each other about the possibility and practice of scientific diplomacy. I'm very happy to continue the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Motoko. And now we're going to go to another speaker of ours that he's online. And his name is Carlos Matsumoto. And Carlos is the coordinator of multilateral cooperation, and he's the head of the International Affairs Office of the Brazilian Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation. Carlos, can you hear us? Can we? Yeah.
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, clearly. Thank you. Please go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
So I'm having some problems with the connection, but I'll try to speak slowly to not have any problem. So thank you, Ministers from Brasilia. Thank you, INGSA and Yamato for the invitation. As mentioned by my previous speakers, we are living in a different complex, international context, marked by the pandemic and geopolitical tensions, which highlight the fragility of global production and supply chains and intensify the disputes for technological domain and competition based on national interests. At the same time, we face global challenges such as extreme weather events, water scarcity, rising sea levels, health emergencies, and food insecurity. And these problems do not recognize borders and of course can be better solved through science diplomacy and international cooperation in science technology innovation. So in this complex context that resurrects pragmatically consolidate our traditional relationships and seek new partnerships. We see science diplomacy as an important instrument for development, for facing the global and regional challenges, and for combating inequalities in the access and production of science, technology, and innovation. So by rescuing Brazil's relevant role in the world, President Lula gives scientific and technological cooperation special status in foreign policy. Since the beginning of this new administration in January 2023, our Minister of Science, Technology, and Innovation completed an extensive international agenda. She was in Argentina, Uruguay, United Kingdom, China, Portugal, Spain, Switzerland, India, Cuba, Vietnam, United Arab Emirates, Germany, Egypt, and Ethiopia to implement bilateral and multilateral cooperation. And during these missions abroad, we signed cooperation agreements, strategic areas such as exhibition intelligence, quantum technologies, semiconductors, climate change, renewable energy, health, bioeconomy, space, and new materials. Also, during this period of 16 months, we announced the joint development of structuring projects for the country, such as the construction of the Brazilian multi-purpose reactor in partnership with Argentina, which by 2028 will make Brazil self-sufficient in the production of radioisotopes for treatment of cancer, and the Cyber-6 satellite in China, which will revolutionize the monitoring of the Amazon forest and other Brazilian biomes through the new radar technology. With Germany, we are cooperating to build in Brazil the first Latin American maximum biosafety containment laboratory, a BSL4, and the first in the world connected to a single online source. With France, we just reactivated our bilateral center for biodiversity. We are maintaining and deepening our traditional and successful cooperation in FTI with North America, and Europe. In the areas of climate change, for example, we have cooperation in large research structures in the Amazon. In Germany, we have the Amazon Tower Observatory, and with United Kingdom, one of the most disruptive projects today, the Amazon Case. We're very happy also to, together with Poland, lead the engagement of developing countries in the Artemis Accords, NASA's fundamental programs to return to lunar exploration. But at the same time, we were giving new impetus to regional programs and projects with Latin America and Caribbean. We are strengthening our activities with BRICS Plus countries, and we are returning to work with our partners in African communities of Portuguese-speaking countries. In the next months, Brazil will launch the PROSUM program, a funding mechanism for regional research projects. We are currently finalizing the sixth call for proposal with Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and we are very excited to start working with Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Iran, Egypt, and Ethiopia in the BRICS Plus framework. With the African continent and other developing countries, President Lula recently proposed during the African Union Summit the joint development of satellites for tropical forest monitoring, generating space data from the global source, south, for utilization in the global south. We will also propose by the end of this year with other Latin American, Caribbean, and African countries and UNESCO a resolution to support the construction of new singleton light source facilities in Africa and the Caribbean. As you know, Brazil has today the most advanced light source in the world, the Sirius, and then contributes to projects like both these, especially in the global south. The coming years will be of particular relevance of Brazil supporting and strengthening of global and regional coordination in science and technology. This year, as you know, we hold the presence of G20. In 2025, we will have the presence of BRICS, and we will organize the UNFCCC COP30 for the first time in the Amazon forest. In 2026, Brazil will host the Latin American Conference in Science and Technology. Specifically in the G20, Brazil proposed the discussion on reducing the asymmetries of technological access through international cooperation, and how we can build bridges between developed and developing countries through open innovation for a just and sustainable development. It is also important to highlight that for the first time, G20 had a specific working group dedicated to research and innovation, and we are very glad to hold this first meeting. Dear participants, last March, Brazil became an associate member of the European Organization for Nuclear Research, CERN. We are the third non-European country to become a CERN member, and the only one in the Americas to join the most advanced research infrastructure for high-energy physics. Last April, Brazil was accepted by the Eureka Council to be a member of this network that counts with almost 50 countries fostering international cooperation in innovation projects. We hope to elevate our participation bilateral and multilateral initiatives to support our national strategy of reindustrialization, sustainable innovation in all cases. To be a technological power in the next 30 years, we will invest in tackling climate change, and the loss of biodiversity, the decarbonization of economy, energy transition, digital transformation, and the self-sufficiency in health. And of course, in overcoming hunger and social inequalities. And we will do this using our best capacities and through bilateral and multilateral calls for research projects. We are mobilizing our scientific diaspora, funding international SDI programs, and constructing and promoting access to global research infrastructure. At the end of this cycle, we understand that Brazil science will have reached a new level, and the benefits will be shared with our population. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Carlos. And now I'm going to go to our last speaker, Professor Rongbin Mu, who is a professor at the Institute of Science and Development of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, the director of the CAS Center for Innovation and Development, and editor-in-chief of the Journal of Science Research Management. Professor Mu, the floor is yours.
Thank you for your invitation to attend these events. I think nowadays science and diplomacy has become a very hot topics. Last week in Beijing, in Zhongguancun Forum, there is also a panel, very similar. And I still remember about 15 years ago in the AAA's meeting, there's a Royal Society and AAA's talk about science and diplomacies. And in my mind, I think first we should start from perspective of scientists, researchers. So in February this year, in AAA's, I find one topic is very interesting to us. It's towards science without war, which means try to promote the collaboration beyond discipline sectors, and I would like to say maybe beyond there's a boundary. That is international collaborations. In my mind, science in a narrow sense is in the high-risk activities, high-risk, high cost to some extent. So this is very important for the multiple shareholders to collaborate with each other, to share the cost, to integrate the great brain to working together is very important. And second, I would like to share the point, there's, in OECD, there's a slogan said, better policy for better life. So I work for the HI policy for more than 30 years. That is also my mentor. What we want to do, not only to provide some advice to the government, but also we want to know some barriers, to try to prevent some unintentional output. That is very important. And in China, we have a lot of such a policy experimentation, different regions. And I think in different countries may have different practices. So that is always to be said, to share the best practices in different countries. So this kind of collaboration is also very important. But the issue is when science extends to technology, to innovation, there's a different understanding about these issues. So when we talk about innovation, not only just scientific issues, but also some economic issues, and some economic issue may have some concern with security. So this kind of international collaboration having a different factors that affect it. So this is need the diplomacy. Try to start to aid the diplomacy perspective, try to integrate different stakeholders working together and try to move the barriers and cross the boundaries. That is my understanding about this kind of science and diplomacy. But when we talk about it further, I think we need not just talk. My previous colleagues here already said we have a lot of practice in terms of science, technology, innovation, collaboration during the past 40 years, Chinese government also have a lot of programs to support such kinds of collaborations. Even today, we still have very sustainable programs from the National Nature Science Foundation of China, from National Science Technology programs. And in the regional level, also there are some kind of programs. But in my mind, I think this is the value system. Yeah, this is always I want to emphasize how to, promote the collaboration based with emphasize the sharing output of the collaborations. This is very important. Not only talk about collaboration, but also talk about sharing mechanism of the collaborations. This is in the past years we have a lot of such best practices. Sustainable more than 30 years collaboration in the science, and more than 30 years in the enterprises collaborations. Lots of practices. And also, I want to add some additional issues so we can discuss here, not only, talk about the science diplomacy, but also, as Mueller said, talk about collaboration of science diplomacy globally, and try to make decision makers have such kind of support, to improve, the future development, nowadays. So when we talk about collaboration, first easy to be understood is economic development, and besides we have global challenges. So many things need working together. Thank you.
Before we open up for questions to the floor, I'm just going to ask all the panelists to answer a simple question, right? Although I hear that all of you have a lot of platforms, already cooperation at some level. Now, given the current context that we are experiencing with geopolitical tensions between West and East, between North and South, how realistic is that cooperation in the field of science diplomacy can help alleviating the tensions? And what needs to happen to achieve this? So this time around, I'm going to go the opposite way. We're going to start with Professor Mu, and then we're going to work our way
for the future. Yeah, for the future, as I said,
even the present, even
one sentence.
No, even the present. You have 2 minutes. Even the present, not only in the future. What can we do right now?
Okay. Right now, the capacity building for these science and diplomacy collaborations. This is the first step, because nowadays we talk, but we need actions in detail. And also this morning we have a lot of panel discovered in the region, in the city level. So this in the region level, we need such kind of capacity building. And also that's the first step. Second step, we need clarifies clearly to some extent the definition. What is science? Or we use 15 years ago. That's the definition of Royal Society and AAA's. But maybe today we need in detail. What is? Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to go with the same question to Carlos. Carlos, I hope that you're still around and you can hear us.
Yes. So I think, well, despite of the current geopolitical tensions, we have some examples that this kind of collaboration are possible and is still going on. So 2 weeks ago, I were in the CSTD meeting in Octavia. I think some of you were there as well. And we hear the experience of ITE and how they are working together. Some countries are working together for the future of energy, renewable energy. So how we can make this kind of examples be not the exception but the rule? I think we don't have the answer right now, but we have some rules. And I think the first one is already mentioned by all of us, it will be global challenges. So we need to be very conscious that these are not problems that will disappear in a short or medium term. It's a long-term problem that needs a global solution. So I think we have to focus in the discussion on global challenges, and this is also related to the achieving SDGs, and of course to having universal and global actions and infrastructures and funding to pursue these global solutions. And the second one, I think we need to have the long-term perspective, because we already have in the past geopolitical tensions. And we have also in the history examples that the links between research and scientific remains. So how we can still have the long-term perspective and learn from the past to see that it's possible, and we need to continue to fund it and support these scientific collaborations, because the researchers, they know, they want to find solutions through their research. So this is some of my contributions. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Motoko? Or
Yeah, thank you very much. So I actually agree with you. Human capacity building is very important, especially the scientific diplomacy domain. In Japan, the diplomacy and the science has been divided. And for example, I have been working for the Council of Science and Technology Innovation, which is the whose mission is to decide policy on science and technology for 5 years. And the chair of this council is the Prime Minister, and half of the members are from Minister, but we miss the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So in Japan, we really need somebody who understands both science and diplomacy. So this is a key issue, because we would like to use science and technology for a better world. And the bilateral, multilateral, the cooperation in science and technology is very important. But if we don't identify the needs and the domain which science and technology work efficiently for the society in that country, it's just, I mean, basic science. I love basic science, but for the society, we need information where we can work together for the benefit of two countries. And so science diplomacy is very important, but this person does not understand science. We cannot do it. And so this capacity building is very important.
thank you. I'm going to Dan.
So if you ask if it is possible to have a truly inclusive global partnership network of science diplomacy, and I emphasize truly inclusive, truly, with everyone, because that's what needed, I would say it would be extremely difficult. But as the experience of my own country has shown, and as our first democratic president, President Nelson Mandela, always said, things are impossible until it's done. So it has to be done. Without perhaps exaggerating the importance of the discussion, I think the prospect for global good in the absence of such collaboration is perhaps one we do not want to contemplate. So what should be done? All credit to Jan Marco and the European Commission for having the courage and the initiative to launch this discussion, because this is the type of discussion we need also with more other players who are not here, and for that discussion to be very frank and speak about the issues, also the difficult issues. Now, Carlos is entirely correct. There are many good examples. He mentioned ITER. I could mention the Square Kilometre Array Observatory, which is the world's largest radio telescope being constructed in Australia and South Africa, bringing together north, south, east, east, and west, and there are other examples. Some of us celebrated the success of science diplomacy during COVID-19, From an African and developing country perspective, I can also show you examples how science diplomacy dismally failed during COVID-19. For example, in terms of the inequities and inequitable access to vaccines. So we have to speak frankly about those issues. But it is a discussion which is worth having, and to say thanks to Jan Marco, South Africa would be very happy to be engaged with this discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. And then we're moving to Jan Marco.
Yes, I would respond with another question. When was the last time that you saw China, Brazil, India, South Africa, the US, the EU, and Japan sitting together on a stage to discuss how to ease geopolitical tensions? It's possible, and it's possible because we all speak the same language, which is the one of science. In a way, this is a living laboratory of science diplomacy that sits here. Now, of course, we need to acknowledge, and that's where the tricky part comes in, that science is only half of the science diplomacy equation. There's another half that is called diplomacy, and that's where the difficult issues are. And if I just take South Africa as an example, they are among our closest allies when it comes to science, but we have quite some different views when it comes to foreign policies. But as Patricia already said at the beginning, I mean, we are faced with really huge global challenges, like climate change, like biodiversity loss, and not one single nation, really not important how powerful it may be, can solve those issues alone. No bloc, be it the G7 or the BRICS or whoever, can solve it alone. We can only do it together. And science plays a key role because we understand these issues and we can come up with solutions. Now the problem is, of course, this polarization which we're experiencing. We are again in this, us versus them, the like-minded versus the non-like-minded, to use the diplomatic wording, and I'm sure the non-like-minded think that they are like-minded and we are the non-like-minded. And I think that's of course where the problem comes in and where we need to find ways to keep the dialogue, to build bridges. You mentioned COVID, Dan. I think, yes, we all know that not everything has been perfect, especially when it comes to the vaccine equity issues. But at the same time, we shouldn't forget why were we able to develop COVID vaccines? It was because Chinese scientists shared the genomes early on. It was because US and EU had funded for many years basic science in RNA technologies. It was because scientists in South Africa Botswana detected the Omicron variant of the virus, and we could adapt the vaccines accordingly. So I think there are very good examples as well of how it could work. And I share one view with you, Dan. Science diplomacy is not just a West-East issue. It's a North-South issue. And it's basically, and by the way, not just about the big guys who sit here on the panel. It's also small countries like Rwanda, like Costa Rica, like Oman, countries that have put themselves on a science diplomacy map in the world and who are serious players in this, and countries with whom we need to engage in science diplomacy. And that's where I think where actually the opportunity comes in. We're seeing everywhere this community of science diplomacy experts emerging. And these are people that can talk to each other. And I think we should foster this dialogue, because by the scientists talking to each other and the science diplomacy experts, we also get the diplomats involved in one way or the other, and we can perhaps help to make the world a better place.
Thank you, Gianmarco. And then I'm going online again. Tsagun, you're still with us?
Yes, very much eager to respond to some of those, but all the comments made were extraordinary. I would like to pick from and also congratulate Gianmarco for actually putting together 3 from G7, 3 from BRICS to sit and do this think exercise, because this is exactly how I think questions like this could be answered. And I would also like to acknowledge what he mentioned about the North-South divide that is available or existing right now in the world of identity of science and access to scientific knowledge. I think that's the key point here. I think that's what itself, but it's also the technology sometimes widens the fragmentation gap, and we have to be very cognizant of this fact. And what are those technologies? How do we play the global governance role, also bringing everybody to be stakeholder into the role? And the other way of technology creating this fragmentation is something that we should frankly be about. And the final point that I have is maybe in a very imaginative tone, but as again Dan said, nothing is impossible until it's done. Why do we have to label everything, right? I mean, in this case, can't we just bring back the scientific activity to the people and the scientists? The moment we label it, put it as national interest, put it as policy priority, say it is science diplomacy of people-to-people connect, we lose the actual essence of what science diplomacy is supposed to achieve. So let's bring back the people-to-people connect in doing science so that it has its essence to carry forward to leverage its benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Chagun. And last but not least, Patricia.
Thank you very much. And I have to thank Jan Marco for never ceasing to give me new ways to think about science diplomacy. I would argue that science diplomacy is, in fact, our best opportunity to cooperate across geopolitical lines. And so it really is important that the science diplomatic community engage on this. But when we think about science diplomacy cooperation at scale, perhaps, to solve an SDG scale problem, I kind of go back to my government R&D roots and think about this as trying to move a concept. To get from concept to results, we have to cross the valley of death. So to do this, we'd have to come up with a shared technology-based goal across a lot of shareholders that would include global north, south, east, and west. What technology are we going to develop and how are we going to field this to solve a global challenge? That's our product concept. Defining it, as said, requires a lot of stakeholders and a lot of people to buy into this goal. Then we put together our multidisciplinary team and we agree on what our approach is going to be. This is our business plan, or our project plan, if you will. And we need inputs from across the public and private sector, from ultimately our customers, because they're the ones who are going to ultimately have to adopt the technology solution. Next, and this is the hard part, we need sustained resources, funding, and policy. This is the political will. And this is where the science advisors, the science diplomats, and the science community itself play a critical role in articulating the opportunities, the risks, and the progress to the policymakers to keep that political will sustained, because they are, in the end, our investors. So this may seem a bit naive, and it's not a perfect analogy, but bear with me. And the reality is not every product crosses the valley of death. They aren't all successful. So we have to be willing collectively to take some risk, be able to be honest with ourselves and assess how we're doing along the way, and change course if necessarily. All of this is going to take a lot of hard work and a lot of concentration, a lot of concentrated effort on a lot of different people's parts. But I will also note that underpinning all of this, if this is the only way that this is successful, is if we as a community also maintain an open S&T ecosystem that is inclusive, reciprocal, and champions freedom of thought and mobility of talent. Thank you.
Thank you. And now it's the time to listen to our audience with any questions or comments that they will have to make. I see a gentleman on the left, and then the lady on the first row.
I think there's some lessons to take from the first Cold War. If you look back in the 1960s through 70s, track 2 science diplomacy, which you've not mentioned at all here, had great successes. The Pugwash conferences, the formation of INGSA, which was promoted by governments but done by the academies, the Villach Conference, which was funded by the International Council of Scientific Unions, which is now the ISC, which led to the IPCC being formed. The International Polar Year, initiated by INGSA, which led to the Antarctic Treaty. And I think it's important in this horribly complex geostrategic time that we think again about the importance not of track 1 science diplomacy, which you've all commented on, but the potential for track 2 science diplomacy. And that's the reason why the ISC, in changing its statutes a few weeks ago, has put science diplomacy as one of its core goals. Because just as its predecessor did in the 1960s and 70s, as the only organization that brings every country in the world into one organization for scientific purposes, it can take a role along the lines of which Dan has suggested. It's truly inclusive. And I think that's essential if we're going to deal with these global challenges. So let's think also about track 2-led as well as track 1-led science diplomacy.
Thank you very much for your comment. Can you please bring the mic to the lady in the front?
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to the panel for the rich discussion. I'm Precious from the National Advisory Council on Innovation. There are some scholars that argue that the macroeconomic policies of several countries are entrenched in a neoliberal trajectory, and they also believe that this is the reason why, you know, there might be some hindrances when it comes to achieving the SDGs. I would like to hear your thinking around this concern, and also what might science diplomacy contribute towards potentially mitigating this challenge?
Okay. Since I don't see any hands right now, we have, let me see if the panel wants to, anyone from the panel would like to take up on the question of Precious.
Just to briefly.
I think Dan, and then I'm going to the lady here. And then back. Yeah, Dan, please.
So just to declare a conflict of interest, Precious is my compatriot.
Okay.
The National Advisory Council of Innovation advises my minister. So, but I think, Precious, the point you make is the one I wanted to make. And I'm not now making any value judgment about neoliberal, Marxist, etc. It is for us to unlock the full potential of science diplomacy, of that discourse to be informed by a multiplicity of views and perspectives, including from those who, and we know some of the scholars in our country, and I know the people you are quoting, vehemently what they would see as a neoliberal dominance. But let's not get into that. I think the point is have a truly inclusive, multi-perspective discussion. And that this is with complete appreciation for the efforts invested in developing the science diplomacy journey thus far. And it goes beyond science diplomacy. It goes beyond, it's science policy, innovation policy as a whole, which in our view will benefit from these different perspectives.
Thank you, Dan. Can we have the mic here? Oh, we have also.
So thank you for the panel. My name is INGSA2024. I'm from the Global Young Academy. As a scientist, when I listen to the science diplomacy panels worldwide, what comes to my mind is that we need the outcome of the science to give to the diplomats. And that's their role to do what they want to do with the science and technology that we created. But as a scientist, I see that maybe the role of the scientist is almost missed in that exchanging the ideas in general. So we just need the outcome of the science for solving the global challenges that we are talking about. But we don't really see that how we are going to help the scientists to do their science in a way that they really like it. For example, the violation of the academic freedoms that we see, restrictions, sanctions, bannings of the scientists from specific countries for specific topics. So that makes me as a scientist really worry, especially for the future generations, that I see more diplomacy in science instead of having diplomacy for science. So I don't know how the geopolitical issues that you're talking about will be able to solve these challenges, to make the life easier for scientists to have the freedom to do what they want to do, not to be worried about the outcome of their science for the benefits of the public good. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone would like to take this up?
I feel compelled to comment on
Please
that.
Do.
The part of my job, or the science diplomat, science advisor's job, that we don't usually talk about is making sure that we are protecting, as I said, that science and technology ecosystem that allows for openness and allows for inclusivity. It is true that there are geopolitical factors, competitive factors, economic factors that will cause politicians to lean more towards protect versus promote. And so it's really a big role that we play to try to balance that policies to make sure that we can maintain that open science and technology environment. And I will say that in the US government at this point anyway, it's, that it is recognized, openness as a very important factor is recognized all the way up to the White House and the Office of Science and Technology Policy. So it's just an ongoing mission that we work to fulfill.
Thank you. Jan, please. Jan Marco.
Yeah.
To move.
I mean, 3 years ago, we adopted in the European Commission the so-called global approach to research and innovation, which is the EU's international R&D strategy. And if you look at the document, it's quite interesting to see. If you see the table of contents, actually, the first half of the document is about values and principles. It is about academic freedom and how can we support kind of the scientific enterprise and the scientists individually. And of course, all these issues come into play around scholars at risk, around refugee scientists, etc. How can we help scientists at home where they are, but of course also if for whatever reason they had to leave their countries. I think this is an important issue which we also need to tackle at the level of science diplomacy. So that's definitely, I think, an issue which I guess we all, given the geopolitical situation as it is, we need to look at a much more holistic way rather than, you know, ad hoc individual solutions. I just wanted to, if you allow, also to respond to the other question, the previous one. I think at the moment the discussion is very much dominated about technology transfer. Yeah? So also in the context of, for instance, the pandemic treaty, the sticky issues, technology transfer. And I think we really need to get much more into discussing the co-creation of research, really as equal partners, where I think also the North can learn a lot from the South, because the South has very often come up with smarter solutions or cheaper solutions than the North. And that's also why we have this, you know, an initiative it's called Global Gateway, which is a kind of a new initiative we have launched at the European Union, which is not classical development project, but it has a clear link to education and to research. So if you give to give a practical example, in the Caribbean they have the problem with this sargassum algae, which is flourishing and it arrives on the beaches and then harms the tourism of the Caribbean islands. So a classical development project would have looked at, okay, removing the algae to get the tourism going again. But in a modern paradigm, I think we should also look at, okay, how can we do together to research how to make something useful out of these algae, for instance, or develop some new solutions. And that's where we really need to co-create research together as equal partners.
Thank you. Mu?
Okay. Previous, the President Peter mentioned, I think nowadays it's very important to have such a channel, you know, to get the people involved in the policy making process, yeah, especially cross the boundary about this collaboration. I still remember in the 1990s, before, during the Cold War, maybe also in the INGSA, I think the International Council for Science Policy Studies, and stakeholders from different countries, North, South, and also the different economies. So that is play a very important role. And second, I think very important, you know, try to get the young generation engaged. As I said, this is a capacity building, and to know. And the third one, I think, from perspective of policy, you know, not only provide some support, yeah, for the, you know, this kind of collaborations, but also, you know, decrease intervention on the normal collaborations. You know, you can isolate, you can limit some very important areas. These could be, you know, relating to some security issues, but the normal collaboration are not so, you know, often intervened by this kind of the government policies, I think. Yeah. So narrow, the boundary, the scope. Yeah.
Thank you. Just to add to the last question, if you remember on my intro, I spoke about the recommendations on science and scientific research, right? And within these recommendations, you have an emphasis on any scientific conduct is subject to universal human rights standards. So there are also some things that can help scientists in different countries.
Yes, here.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see.
Yeah,
Please
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
I'm a little bit late, but I know. So I noticed the information among the different levels of scientists also an important issue challenge. So I work for the government, the Foreign Minister of Affairs, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the information I get is on this level, but also as an executive vice president for research at the university. First of all, the president and vice president has the information, which is a little bit different from mine, but still it's very different from the researcher, the department head. And so the communication among the countries is important, but also in the country, the communication with the researcher and policymaker and all the citizens, and it's also very important. And because the university is a place where we develop the open science for the future, and so I encourage my researcher to become as open as possible, but to protect them from some danger, I have to tell them some kind of guidance for the scientific security, research security as well. So this kind of communication is very important as well.
Thank you, Motoko. I had seen a question on the back.
Hello, good afternoon. So my name is Robert. I come from Kiribati. I'm pretty much sure some of you will check where that country is. And so we've established establishing a Pacific Island Academy of Humanities and Science in the Pacific. So just listening to the conversation here, it's great to see that through science you're all able to collaborate and sit there and share with us your knowledge and experience. I was just hoping are there any efforts to reach down to the South Pacific where I come from, because our issues in science as well, with climate change and sea level rise is something to talk about. And going through the whole today and probably tomorrow, all the panelists, I haven't seen anyone from the Pacific as well. I think I'm the only one from the Pacific region here. So I'm here to extend a welcome thank you to Rwanda, and try to encourage you guys to come to the Pacific for the upcoming events. Thank you.
Thank you. Right after you, please.
Yeah. My name is Arimoto from Tokyo. So my comments is in terms of the training and the development of the particularly young scientists. So I very impressed the INGSA and the International Science Council proposed the concept, new scope of the scientist. Who is a scientist in the changing world? So they proposed the 4 types of the scientist. I understand. First one is a traditional scientist, is the new knowledge generators, scientific knowledge generators. Second one is a synthesizer, knowledge synthesizer for creating some values. And the third one is the broker. Yes, your science advisor, something like that. Last one is the communicators. But I understanding is normally these 20 or 30 years, the science communications No, this one is the reflecting the our experiences, corona pandemic. It's communication and capacity of communications for the scientists is very, very important. So not only the one way make understanding general public. Anyway, so coming back in terms of the new training and the training course is we should pay attention. Such kind of the scientist is the need to be transformed and the new capabilities. My comments. Thank you.
Thank you. We have to start wrapping up because we have only 1 minute. So I'm going to ask you rapidly to give me your vision for science diplomacy. Patricia, I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
Me?
Yes.
Yes, me. Okay. 20 seconds. Just as there is no one right way to do or manage science and technology, there is no single template for science diplomacy. It's dynamic. It changes case by case, partner by partner, challenge by challenge. It just is going to take continuous hard work.
Okay, Gianmarco.
Well, my vision for science diplomacy is that we actually manage that scientists and diplomats work hand in hand to solve the global challenges which affect all of us. And in so doing, help building trust between nations, because trust is the key issue that we need to tackle.
Thank you. I'm going to Chagun. I'm sorry. Chagun, I apologize.
No problem. I think shuffling the sequence also makes sense. My vision, at least now, for science diplomacy is we should be able to leverage the fullest potential of science diplomacy, where we consider that the romanticizing period of science diplomacy is over, and we get into the pragmatism where competition and collaboration can coexist in our science diplomacy models.
Thank you. Dan.
You know, there's an old joke that you should be wary of people who have visions, but I mean, at least here in INGSA, it should be an evidence-based vision. Well, provocatively, my vision is, or what I would hope for, is that science diplomacy should disappear. It should disappear as a buzzword where we talk amongst ourselves. And even today, there's so many colleagues and friends in a room where we talk amongst ourselves. But what we would want is that the conduct and the values of science diplomacy transform diplomacy. It transforms international cooperation in science, and that leads to a more equitable and a more just and a more safer world.
Thank you. We're going to Motoko.
Yeah, so nobody predicted the current situation before COVID and the Ukrainian and the geopolitical tension become such a high. So as Patricia said, the science diplomacy is really changing, and so we have to really keep in touch and to keep this kind of fora to exchange information through the human network. And this opportunity in person to establish a network in a true sense that because once we establish that trust through the communication in person, it will sustain even in the complex situation. And so I think the INGSA provides such an opportunity, and the STI Forum is another opportunity, and the International Science Council will provide such an opportunity. And we should keep this kind of opportunity and invite more people from different perspectives to this forum. So.
Thank you. Carlos?
So even though we have a complex scenario today, I think we should be optimistic and confident that in the future we'll have more science diplomacy and not less science diplomacy. So in the past we showed that the political system builds infrastructure such as CERN or CESAM, and I'm very keen to see what the political system will answer for this current situation. But I'm very optimistic. So, and thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you, Carlos.
Oh, thank you. So I think science diplomacy is important, and will be increasingly more important. So this is consensus in my mind. So the next, we need action, improvement, reaction, and try to establish such a mechanism to improve the actions and to encourage practices in different countries, different regions. And we need INGSA such a platform, a channel, and work together with other channels to put this in action.
Thank you very much. May I ask you to give a round of applause for our panel? And thank you all for your patience and participation. Have a good afternoon.